The service door wasn't on the building plans. That was my first thought as I stood in the cold, narrow passage that smelled of industrial cleaner and forgotten things. A single flickering bulb cast shadows that seemed to move on their own against the concrete walls. My security uniform suddenly felt like a costume, something I'd been foolish enough to believe offered protection. 3 hours earlier, Julian Mercer had looked at me with recognition that shifted quickly to calculation. My new employer, the billionaire owner of the Obsidian Tower, had studied my face with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You look familiar," he'd said, voice casual but eyes sharp as glass. Then, as if making a decision, "When your shift ends, please exit through the service door." I should have asked why. I should have mentioned that employees typically use the staff entrance on the east side. Instead, I had nodded, professional smile fixed in place, while something cold and ancient in my brain whispered danger. Now I stood in this unmarked corridor that shouldn't exist, listening to the heavy metal door lock behind me with a sound of finality. In my pocket, my fingers closed around the small object I discovered earlier in the penthouse suite. The reason, I suspected, that Julian Mercer had recognized me after all. I just didn't know yet if I would make it out of this building alive. The Obsidian Tower earned its name honestly. 68 stories of gleaming black glass that reflected the city back upon itself, distorted and darkened. From certain angles, the building seemed to disappear into the sky, as if it were swallowing light rather than reflecting it. Architectural magazines called it revolutionary. City residents called it imposing. I called it my new workplace. After 18 months of unemployment following my abrupt departure from Boston Police Department's Special Investigations Unit, the security position felt like salvation. The pay was triple standard rate, the hours reasonable, and the job description straightforward. Monitor the building's exclusive residences, maintain a professional presence in the lobby, and ensure the privacy and safety of the ultra-wealthy occupants. "We're particularly interested in your background," the HR director had said during my interview, not quite looking at my resume where the reason for my departure from the force was carefully omitted. "Your experience with complex investigations could be valuable." I hadn't asked why a luxury residential building would need someone with experience in investigating financial crimes and unexplained deaths. The truth was, I needed this job more than I needed answers. After the Boston PD had quietly suggested I resign following the Harrington case, a suicide that I alone insisted was murder, my reputation and bank account had suffered equally devastating blows. My first week at the Obsidian passed uneventfully. I learned the routines, which residents preferred to be greeted and which avoided eye contact, which staff members were helpful and which maintained rigid boundaries. I memorized the security protocols, camera positions, and emergency procedures. I observed the distinct social ecosystem that existed within the building's black walls. The Obsidian housed only 40 residential units despite its towering height, with entire floors dedicated to single apartments. The smallest units started at $15 million. The penthouse, owned by Julian Mercer himself, occupied the top 3 floors and was rumored to have cost more than the GDP of a small nation. I rarely saw Mercer. He was something of a legend in the building, the tech mogul who had made his billions developing encryption software before expanding into real estate and private security. Staff spoke of him in hushed tones, describing brief encounters in elevators or glimpses as he was whisked through the private garage entrance. On my 8th day, Mercer's personal assistant Evelyn Crane summoned me to the security office. Tall and impeccably dressed, with a perpetual expression suggesting she was mentally calculating complex equations, Evelyn managed Mercer's domestic affairs with precision that bordered on severity. "Mr. Mercer has requested you personally for additional security duties," she said, her voice crisp as fresh currency. "He's hosting a private gathering tomorrow evening and would like you to supervise the security team." I kept my expression neutral. "I'm relatively new. There are more experienced staff who might." "Mr. Mercer specified you, Mr. Sullivan," she interrupted, consulting her tablet. "He reviewed all personnel files and selected you based on your background." There it was again, my background, being treated as an asset rather than the career-ending liability it had become in law enforcement. "The event begins at 8 p.m. Please arrive at the penthouse level at 6 p.m. for a briefing." She handed me an access card with gold edging. "This will grant you temporary access to the penthouse floors. Do not lose it." The next evening I arrived at the private elevator that served the penthouse. My uniform was freshly pressed, shoes polished to a mirror shine. The gold-edged access card slid into the elevator panel with a satisfying click, and I ascended silently toward the summit of the tower. The elevator opened directly into an expansive foyer of white marble veined with gold. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city spread out below like a circuit board studded with lights. A subtle fragrance hung in the air, something expensive and unidentifiable. The space projected wealth so absolute it no longer needed to announce itself. "Mr. Sullivan." Evelyn approached from a side corridor. "Follow me for your briefing." She led me through the penthouse, past rooms that defied easy classification, spaces designed for entertaining, for privacy, for displaying art worth more than I would earn in several lifetimes. The security arrangement seemed straightforward enough. 20 guests, all wealthy and influential, gathering for what Evelyn described as a discussion of mutual interests. My job was to ensure privacy, monitor access points, and coordinate with the building's main security team. "Mr. Mercer values discretion above all else," Evelyn concluded. "The guest list and conversation topics are strictly confidential." I nodded, though something about the situation prickled at my investigative instincts. This wasn't standard security for a social gathering. This had the hallmarks of operational security for something requiring absolute privacy. As Evelyn turned to leave, I glimpsed a familiar face in a photograph on a side table, a young woman with thoughtful eyes and a hesitant smile. Before I could process why she looked familiar, a voice spoke from behind me. "Do you like art, Mr. Sullivan?" I turned to find Julian Mercer himself, regarding me with polite interest. In person, he was less imposing than his reputation suggested, mid-50s, average height, with the lean build of someone who followed a carefully prescribed fitness regimen. Only his eyes suggested his extraordinary status, pale blue and evaluating, giving the impression they missed nothing. "I appreciate it," I answered carefully, though I claimed no expertise. Mercer smiled, the expression not quite reaching those assessing eyes. "Expertise is less important than instinct, don't you think? The ability to recognize value, even when others miss it." He gestured for me to follow him into what appeared to be a private gallery. The walls displayed an eclectic collection, contemporary paintings alongside what appeared to be ancient artifacts, digital displays next to classical sculptures. "Security isn't just about physical protection," Mercer continued as we walked. "It's about understanding what needs protecting and why. You have an interesting background, Mr. Sullivan. Boston Police, Special Investigations. You handled the Harrington case, didn't you?" I kept my expression neutral despite the jolt of surprise. "Those records should be sealed." "Should be," Mercer agreed mildly. "But information, like water, finds its way through barriers." He stopped before a small display case containing what appeared to be a bronze key, ancient and corroded. "You believed Harrington's death wasn't suicide. You were convinced someone in his financial circle was responsible." "I followed the evidence," I said carefully. "But the department disagreed with my conclusions." "Because the evidence was circumstantial," Mercer suggested. "And Harrington moved in powerful circles." The conversation was venturing into dangerous territory. My insistence that Thomas Harrington had been murdered by one of his business associates had cost me my career, my savings, and nearly my sanity. I had pursued the case beyond reasonable limits because I couldn't accept that a healthy, successful man would abruptly take his own life, especially after confiding to his sister that he had discovered something disturbing in his company's financial records. "That's all in the past," I said firmly. "I'm focused on my current position." Mercer studied me with unexpected intensity. "Is it really in the past, though? Or have you simply been waiting for the right moment to prove you were correct?" Before I could respond, Evelyn appeared at the gallery entrance. "The first guests are arriving, sir." "Thank you, Evelyn." Mercer turned to me, his demeanor shifting back to cordial employer. "Please take your position, Mr. Sullivan. Remember, discretion above all." Throughout the evening, I maintained a professional presence, positioned near the main entrance to the entertaining space. Guests arrived in carefully spaced intervals, men and women in understated but clearly expensive evening wear, their security details remaining in the building's lower levels. I recognized several faces from financial news programs and political fundraisers. The conversation remained muted, with guests breaking into smaller groups across the expansive space. From my position, I could observe but not overhear. Still, the body language suggested these were not friends gathering socially but associates engaged in serious discussion. Midway through the evening, a disruption caught my attention. A younger guest, perhaps 30, with a nervous energy that contrasted with the composed demeanor of the others, was engaged in what appeared to be a tense exchange with Mercer. Their voices remained low, but their gestures betrayed agitation. Mercer placed a calming hand on the younger man's shoulder, guiding him toward a private study. As they passed my position, I caught a fragment of their conversation. Can't just contain it forever, the young man was saying. People are asking questions about. We'll discuss this privately, Mercer interrupted, his voice pleasant but firm. His eyes met mine briefly, acknowledging my presence while simultaneously warning against interest in their conversation. The gathering concluded precisely at 11 p.m. As the final guests departed, Evelyn approached me. Mr. Mercer would like you to verify that all guests have left the premises before you conclude your shift, she said. Please conduct a thorough check of this level and report directly to him. I did as instructed, methodically examining each room. The penthouse was silent now, the evidence of the gathering already being efficiently removed by staff. In a small antechamber off the main entertaining space, I noticed a tablet that had been left behind. Standard procedure would be to bring it to Lost and Found, but something, a detective's curiosity that had never quite been extinguished, prompted me to wake the screen. It wasn't locked. The displayed document appeared to be financial records, complex spreadsheets showing enormous transfers between numbered accounts. One highlighted entry caught my eye. Harrington Containment, final payment. My heart rate accelerated. Thomas Harrington. The suicide I hadn't believed was suicide. Here was his name, in a document left at a gathering in Julian Mercer's penthouse, connected to payments that suggested something had needed containing. I heard footsteps approaching and quickly placed the tablet as I'd found it. A moment later, the nervous young man from earlier appeared in the doorway. Oh, I left he stopped. I was darting between me and the tablet. I'll just take that. I stepped aside, maintaining a professional demeanor. Of course, sir. He snatched up the tablet, clutching it against his chest. You didn't, he stopped himself. Thank you. After he departed, I completed my inspection and reported to Mercer in his private office. The space was minimalist, dominated by a desk that appeared to be carved from a single slab of black stone. Behind it, windows showcased the city's glittering skyline. All guests have departed, sir. All rooms are secure. Mercer was reading something on his computer screen, the blue light reflecting off his glasses. Without looking up, he asked, Did you find anything unusual during your inspection, Mr. Sullivan? The question seemed pointed. Had the young man reported our encounter? Had there been cameras I hadn't noticed in the antechamber? Nothing of concern, I answered neutrally. Mercer looked up then, studying my face with that same unsettling intensity from earlier. You look familiar to me. Have we met before your employment here? A warning bell sounded in my mind. I don't believe so, sir. He continued to study me, then nodded slightly as if confirming something to himself. When your shift ends tonight, please exit through the service door on the northeast corner. Evelyn will show you. The request was odd. Staff typically used the dedicated service elevator to the staff entrance on the ground floor. But questioning the building's owner about established protocols didn't seem wise. Of course, sir. As I turned to leave, my eye caught the same photograph I'd noticed earlier, the young woman with the thoughtful expression. From this angle, I could see more of the image. The woman was standing next to an older man, both dressed in academic regalia. With a jolt, I recognized her, Eliza Harrington, Thomas Harrington's sister. The one who had insisted her brother would never take his own life. The one who had disappeared shortly after I was forced to abandon the investigation. As Evelyn led me toward the northeast corner of the penthouse, my mind raced. The Harrington case. Mercer's strange interest in my background. The document with Harrington Containment. Eliza Harrington's photograph in Mercer's penthouse. These couldn't be coincidences. We reached a heavy metal door marked only with a small exit sign. It looked more appropriate for a service area than a luxury penthouse. This will take you directly to the ground level, Evelyn explained, swiping her access card. Mr. Mercer prefers certain staff use dedicated routes to maintain the aesthetic experience for residents. The explanation sounded reasonable, but instinct told me otherwise. As the door opened to reveal a utilitarian concrete stairwell, I noticed Evelyn didn't follow. Instead, she handed me a small package wrapped in black tissue paper. Mr. Mercer asked that you accept this token of appreciation for your service tonight. The package was small and surprisingly heavy. I accepted it with thanks, stepping through the doorway. Behind me, the door closed with a decisive click, followed by the unmistakable sound of a lock engaging. The service stairwell was harshly lit and smelled of industrial cleaner. As I descended the narrow steps, I unwrapped the package. Inside was a small bronze object, identical to the ancient key I had seen displayed in Mercer's gallery. And suddenly, standing in that cold concrete passage, I understood. I was meant to make a connection between Harrington, Mercer, and whatever had happened 18 months ago that had destroyed my career. This wasn't coincidence or paranoia. It was an invitation, or a trap. I reached the bottom of the stairs only to find another heavy door, this one requiring an access card I didn't possess. I was locked in the stairwell, holding what appeared to be an ancient artifact from Mercer's collection, with surveillance cameras undoubtedly recording my every move. I had been set up. But for what? My training kicked in automatically. First, assess immediate threats. I was trapped in a stairwell, but not in immediate danger. Second, evaluate resources. I had my phone, security access card, likely now deactivated, standard equipment, and this mysterious bronze key. Third, analyze options. I could call for assistance, attempt to force the exit door, or wait and see what developed. I examined the key more carefully. Despite appearing ancient, it felt too light in my hand. A replica, then. But why give me a replica of an artifact? What was I meant to do with it? The stairwell door above me opened. I tucked the key into my pocket and turned, expecting Evelyn or perhaps security personnel. Instead, a small figure slipped through the door, a child, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, with solemn dark eyes and an expression far too serious for her age. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You need to come with me now, before they check the cameras." "Who are you?" I asked, instinctively softening my tone. "How do you know my name?" "I'm Sophie," she replied simply. "I live on the 52nd floor. And everyone knows who you are now." There was something unsettling about her calm certainty. "Does your family know you're here, Sophie?" A shadow crossed her face. "My mom is at a hospital board meeting. The nanny is watching TV. I've been exploring the building for months. No one notices where I go." She gestured impatiently toward the door she'd entered through. "I can get you out of here, but we have to go now." Every instinct warned against following a child into an unknown situation. But remaining in the stairwell meant eventual discovery, and Sophie seemed to have information I needed. "Lead the way," I said. "But you'll need to explain some things." She swiped a resident access card, undoubtedly her mother's, and guided me back into the stairwell, but heading upward rather than down. "Where are we going?" I asked as we climbed. "Mechanical floor," she answered without looking back. "It's the only place without full camera coverage. They needed physical space for the systems, so there are blind spots." Her knowledge of the building's security systems was concerning. What kind of child explored mechanical floors and mapped surveillance blind spots? "Sophie, how do you know about security cameras and blind spots?" She paused on a landing, giving me a look that suggested my question was naive. "My mom says I notice things other people don't. And I heard the security men talking once when they didn't know I was there." She continued climbing. "Also, I can't sleep sometimes. Walking helps." We emerged onto a floor humming with machinery, HVAC systems, electrical panels, and water treatment equipment. Sophie navigated confidently through the labyrinth of pipes and conduits to a small alcove containing what appeared to be a maintenance workstation. A desk, a computer terminal, several monitors showing building systems. "We have 14 minutes before the next security sweep," she announced, settling into the chair. "They check every hour, on the hour." I surveyed our surroundings, noting exit routes and potential weapons, a habit from my police days. "Sophie, you need to tell me what's going on. Why did you help me? What do you know about Julian Mercer?" She tapped rapidly at the keyboard, bringing up what appeared to be a building management system. "I help because my mom always says we should help people in trouble. And you're in trouble, even if you don't know how much yet." She glanced up at me. "Mr. Mercer isn't who he says he is. And neither are you." The statement caught me off guard. "What do you mean? Your name isn't just Sullivan. It's Sullivan Harrington. I saw it on your full background check." She continued typing. "Thomas Harrington was your cousin. But you don't use his name because of what happened to him. And what happened to his sister after." My blood ran cold. She was right. I had dropped the hyphenated surname professionally years ago for simplicity, but after Thomas's death and the subsequent destruction of my career, I'd removed it legally as well, partly to distance myself from the controversy, partly out of shame that I had failed to get justice for my family. "How could you possibly know that?" She shrugged. "I told you. I notice things. Like how Mr. Mercer sometimes uses different names when he thinks no one is listening. Or how people disappear from the building sometimes." "What people? What do you mean disappear?" "Like Mr. Wilson from the 47th floor. He was asking questions about the building's foundation last month. Then he moved out, overnight." She made air quotes around the words. "But his favorite shoes were still in the hallway the next morning." Who moves without their favorite shoes? A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the mechanical room's aggressive air conditioning. Sophie might be imaginative, but her observations were specific and troubling. What about Eliza Harrington? I asked carefully. Have you seen her in the building? Sophie's fingers paused on the keyboard. The lady from the photograph? I saw her once, going into Mr. Mercer's private elevator. She looked scared. She resumed typing. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't seen her since. 3 weeks ago. Eliza had been alive 3 weeks ago, in this building, after being missing for over a year. Sophie, this is very important. Is there anywhere in this building that isn't on the official plans? Somewhere that might not show up on these systems? She nodded without hesitation. The sub-basement. It doesn't exist on any of the public plans, but I've seen it on the elevator control system. It needs special access. She pointed to her screen. See? SB 3. That's 3 levels below the lowest parking garage. I studied the display. Sure enough, beneath P5, the lowest parking level according to building plans, were 3 additional designations, SB 1, SB 2, and SB 3. Can you access the security feeds for those levels? She shook her head. Those run on a closed system. But her expression brightened with a child's pride in knowing a secret. I know another way down. Through the old service elevator shaft. Before I could question her further, an alert flashed on the screen. Sophie immediately began closing windows. Security sweep starting early. We need to move. Now. We slipped out of the maintenance room just as the elevator at the far end of the floor pinged. Sophie led me through a maze of equipment to what appeared to be an abandoned elevator shaft, sealed off by a metal grate. She produced a small tool from her pocket and worked at the padlock. How often do you explore dangerous parts of the building alone? I asked, torn between concern for her safety and gratitude for her help. It's only dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, she replied with a child's unshakable confidence. The lock clicked open. There are maintenance ladders inside. We can climb down to the parking levels, then use my mom's card to access the emergency stairs to the sub-basements. Sophie, this is becoming too dangerous. I should get you back to your apartment. She fixed me with a solemn stare. Mr. Sullivan Harrington, I'm helping you because you're the only adult who might believe me. Something bad is happening in this building. I've tried to tell my mom, but she says I have an overactive imagination. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But I've heard the voices from below. And sometimes, at night, I hear someone crying. I realized then that Sophie wasn't just a precocious child with a penchant for exploration. She was a witness, one whose observations had been dismissed because of her age, just as my concerns about Thomas had been dismissed because of lack of evidence. All right, I said, but you stay behind me, and if I tell you to run, you run. No questions. She nodded solemnly and pulled the grate open. The abandoned shaft yawned before us, service lights providing minimal illumination. Steel maintenance ladders ran along the walls, disappearing into darkness below. Ladies first, I said, positioning myself to help her onto the ladder. She gave me a look that was surprisingly mature. Nice try, but you're heavier. You go first to make sure the ladder holds. Smart kid. The descent was slow and tense, the ladder occasionally creaking under our weight. Sophie remained silent except to offer directions at junction points. We passed through what must have been the full height of the tower, eventually reaching a solid platform that marked the bottom of the shaft. Parking level 5, Sophie whispered, pointing to a maintenance door. We need to cross to the east stairwell. That's the only one that goes lower. We slipped through the door into the lowest parking garage, a space reserved for long-term storage of residents' vehicles. Expensive cars under protective covers stood in neat rows, the space eerily silent. We moved carefully between the vehicles, staying in shadow. There, Sophie pointed to a door marked Emergency Exit in the far corner. That stairwell has access to the sub-levels if you have the right key. The right key. I reached into my pocket, fingers closing around the bronze replica Mercer had given me. It couldn't be coincidence. Sophie, I need you to wait here, I said firmly. What's beyond that door might be dangerous. She crossed her arms. I got you this far. And if something happens to you, I'm stuck explaining to security why I'm in the parking garage at midnight. She had a point. And keeping her with me meant I could ensure her safety, at least until I found a way to get her back to her apartment. The emergency exit door required Sophie's access card, but opened to reveal an ordinary stairwell. It wasn't until we descended another flight that we encountered a heavy security door marked only with SB 1 in small lettering. Next to it was an unusual-looking lock, not electronic, but mechanical. I removed the bronze key from my pocket. In the stairwell light, I could see details I'd missed before, unusual notches and ridges, an intricacy that suggested it was designed for a specific, custom lock. That's like the old keys Mr. Mercer collects, Sophie observed. He has a whole cabinet of them in his private study. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease. It turned with a heavy, satisfying click, and the door opened to reveal a corridor unlike anything else in the luxury tower. Utilitarian concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, and a distinct absence of the opulence that characterized the upper floors. "Stay close," I whispered to Sophie. We moved cautiously down the corridor, passing doors marked only with numbers. The space had the feel of a research facility or secure archive, climate-controlled, with subtle air circulation and specialized lighting. At the end of the hallway was another security door, this one marked SB2. Again, the bronze key worked. Beyond this door, the environment changed further. The lighting dimmed to a soft amber glow, and the air held a distinct scent, something medicinal and sharp beneath the building's standard ventilation. "I don't like it down here," Sophie whispered, her earlier confidence wavering. "It feels wrong." I had to agree. Every instinct warned of danger, yet I felt compelled to continue. If Eliza was somewhere in this building, if there was any connection to what had happened to Thomas, I needed to find it. The third security door required not only the key but a numeric code. I hesitated, hand hovering over the keypad. "Try 8-2-7-4, Sophie suggested quietly. When I looked at her questioningly, she added, "It's the code Mr. Mercer uses for his private elevator." I watched him once. The code worked. The door opened silently to reveal a space that didn't belong in a residential building, a sophisticated laboratory facility with multiple workstations, specialized equipment, and glass-walled chambers at the far end. The space was dimly lit but clearly active, monitors displayed scrolling data, and equipment hummed with power. "Wait here," I instructed Sophie, positioning her by the door we'd entered through. "If anyone comes, hide. If you can't hide, run." I moved through the laboratory, careful not to disturb anything. The workstations held research I couldn't interpret, complex molecular models, genetic sequences, and data sets tracking what appeared to be experimental results. One screen displayed a familiar name that stopped me cold: Harrington Protocol, Phase 3. My attention was drawn to the glass chambers at the end of the lab. As I approached, I realized they were observation rooms, or cells, with hospital-grade equipment inside. 3 of the 4 were empty. The 4th contained a bed, medical monitoring equipment, and a figure lying motionless beneath a light blanket. Eliza Harrington, my cousin Thomas's sister. The woman who had fought so hard to have his death investigated properly, who had disappeared shortly after I was forced off the case. Her face was thinner than I remembered, her complexion pallid, but she was undeniably alive. The monitors showed stable vital signs. As I stood frozen in shock, trying to process what I was seeing, a voice spoke from behind me. "I wondered how long it would take you to find your way down here, Detective Sullivan." Julian Mercer stood in the laboratory entrance, impeccably dressed despite the late hour. Next to him, Sophie looked terrified, her small hand gripped tightly in Mercer's larger one. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "He was waiting when I turned around." "It's not your fault," I assured her, mind racing through options. I needed to protect Sophie and somehow get help for Eliza. "Mr. Mercer, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Mercer smiled thinly. "No misunderstanding. You've simply proven more resourceful than anticipated." He guided Sophie to a chair at one of the workstations. "Please sit quietly, young lady. The adults need to talk." To my relief, he made no threatening moves toward the child. Instead, he turned his attention fully to me. "You found what you've been looking for. The proof that Thomas Harrington didn't commit suicide, that his sister didn't simply disappear. The validation you sought when the department forced you out. What have you done to her?" I demanded, gesturing toward Eliza's unconscious form. "Done to her?" Mercer raised an eyebrow. "You misunderstand. I've done nothing to her. I've done everything for her." He moved toward the glass chamber, gazing at Eliza with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Eliza Harrington was dying when she came to me. The same rare genetic condition that took her brother. Thomas didn't die from a genetic condition. He fell from his balcony. After receiving a diagnosis that offered no hope. Yes." Mercer's voice took on a lecturer's tone. "The Harrington siblings carried a genetic mutation so rare it doesn't have a formal name. A progressive deterioration of neural pathways leading to mental instability and eventually, total system failure. Thomas chose a faster end when he understood what awaited him." I shook my head. Thomas left a message for his sister about discovering something in the company finances. The next day he was dead. That's not coincidence. No, it wasn't, Mercer agreed, surprising me. Thomas discovered my investment in his company, specifically in their genetic research division. He understood what it meant, that I knew about his condition, that I had been tracking the Harrington genetic line for generations. The implication sent a chill through me. Generations. Your family carries something remarkable, Detective. A genetic anomaly that, when properly understood, could revolutionize human longevity. Thomas realized what I was doing and panicked. Eliza came to me afterward, convinced her brother had been murdered, but then her own symptoms began. He gestured toward the monitors displaying Eliza's vital signs. She's stable now. The treatment is experimental but promising. Without it, she would be dead, just like her brother. And you keep her unconscious, locked in a secret laboratory beneath your building? I couldn't keep the disgust from my voice. That's imprisonment, not treatment. It's protection, Mercer countered. The sedation is temporary, a necessary component of the genetic therapy. She'll wake soon, with a new lease on life. His gaze sharpened. A lease you might need yourself, Sullivan Harrington. You carry the same genes. The revelation hit like a physical blow. That's not possible. I'm not. A direct blood relation? No. But the Harrington mutation doesn't follow conventional patterns. It can skip generations, manifest differently across family branches. You haven't shown symptoms yet, but your genetic profile, he gestured to a nearby monitor displaying what appeared to be a DNA sequence with my name, carries the markers. My mind reeled. Was it possible? Could this explain why I had been so driven to investigate Thomas's death, some genetic instinct recognizing a shared vulnerability? Sophie's voice broke the tense silence. You're keeping other people down here too. I've heard them. Mercer gave her an appraising look. Remarkably perceptive child. Yes, there are others. Volunteers in the early stages of genetic decline who recognize the value of my work. Volunteers don't need to be kept in secret underground facilities, I pointed out. They do when what we're doing exists in a regulatory gray area, Mercer replied smoothly. The treatment protocols haven't received FDA approval. They won't for decades, given the bureaucracy involved. Meanwhile, people like your cousin, like Eliza, don't have decades. I needed to keep him talking while I assessed options. The laboratory had one obvious exit, and Mercer stood between us and it. I had no weapon, and Sophie's safety complicated any potential confrontation. So you staged the gathering tonight to lure me here? To what end? Mercer sighed. Nothing so dramatic. I've been observing you since you applied for the position. Tonight was simply an opportunity to accelerate matters. The young man you observed, Adrian Hughes, has become somewhat unstable recently, a side effect of his treatment. I needed to ensure you understood the stakes before he potentially made public statements that could jeopardize everything. By giving me a key to your secret basement laboratory? I challenged. That doesn't make sense. I gave you the key because your family, Mercer said simply. Eliza asked for you specifically when she first came to me. She believed you were the only one who would understand what Thomas had discovered. His expression softened slightly. I'm not your enemy, Sullivan. I'm offering you answers and potentially salvation. At what cost? I gestured around the laboratory. Secret facilities? Imprisoned volunteers? What happens to those who want to leave your program? A shadow crossed Mercer's face. The treatment creates certain dependencies. Withdrawal can be catastrophic. And there it was, the truth behind the disappearances Sophie had noticed. People weren't leaving the program. They couldn't. You're creating addicts, I said flatly. People dependent on your experimental treatments. I'm creating survivors, Mercer corrected. Would you rather Eliza die from her genetic condition or live with a manageable dependency? Before I could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the laboratory. Red lights flashed, and automated systems activated with mechanical precision. Mercer frowned, checking his phone. It seems our conversation has attracted attention, he said grimly. Building security has detected unauthorized access to restricted areas. Sophie stood up from her chair, her young face determined. I can get us out. There's another way. Mercer and I both turned to her. What other way? Mercer demanded. The old service tunnels, she replied, backing toward a wall panel I hadn't noticed. They connect to the city's utility system. I've explored them before. She pressed something on the panel, and it swung inward to reveal a narrow passage. Mom always says I'm too curious for my own good. The alarm grew louder, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor we'd entered through. Mercer's security team was approaching. Sophie, Go, I ordered. Get out of here and call for help. But she shook her head stubbornly. Not without you. And not without her. She pointed toward Eliza's chamber. Mercer stepped between us and the hidden passage. I can't let you leave, Sullivan. You know too much, and your genetic profile makes you too valuable. Then we have a problem, I said, positioning myself between him and Sophie. The footsteps were closer now, accompanied by radio chatter. In moments, this laboratory would be flooded with Mercer's security personnel. Whatever was going to happen needed to happen quickly. There's something else you should know, Mercer said, his voice taking on an urgent quality. The young man from tonight, Adrian Hughes, isn't just unstable from the treatment. He's planning to expose everything. Tomorrow morning, he intends to go to the FBI with evidence of what he calls illegal human experimentation. Despite everything, I felt a flash of respect for Hughes. At least someone was willing to risk everything to expose the truth. Good for him, I said. He'll destroy any chance of this research continuing, Mercer pressed. People like Eliza will die without access to the treatment. The greater good. The greater good doesn't include kidnapping and imprisonment, I interrupted. The security team had reached the outer door. I could hear them working to bypass the electronic locks. We had perhaps 2 minutes before they breached the laboratory. Sophie tugged at my sleeve. We have to go now. Once they get inside, they'll lock down everything. I looked at Eliza, still unconscious in her medical prison. Leaving her felt like abandoning family again. But staying meant capture, and Sophie's safety was paramount. Can we get her out through your tunnel? I asked Sophie quietly. She studied the chamber, her expression serious. The gurney has wheels. If we can get her disconnected from the machines. Mercer overheard. You can't remove her from life support. The treatment requires continuous monitoring. Without it, she dies, I finished. Or maybe she finally gets a chance to make her own choice about her life. I moved toward the chamber's control panel, looking for release mechanisms. The medical equipment was sophisticated but not entirely unfamiliar, similar to systems I'd seen during my years working with crime scene investigators and coroners. Sullivan, stop, Mercer commanded, his composed facade finally cracking. You don't understand the implications. This research could save millions of lives. At the cost of how many individual freedoms? I challenged, working at the chamber controls. You've created a system where people can't consent because they're unconscious and can't leave because they'll die. That's not medicine, that's control. The outer security door burst open. Shouts echoed through the laboratory as multiple figures in tactical gear entered the space. Found them, someone called. 3 subjects in the main lab. Sophie grabbed my arm. Now or never. I made a split-second decision. Rather than attempting to move Eliza in her current state, I activated what appeared to be an emergency wake protocol on her chamber. If the treatment was as successful as Mercer claimed, she should be stable enough to regain consciousness briefly. Alarms began sounding from her monitoring equipment as various systems detected the interruption. But her eyes fluttered open, confused and disoriented but aware. Eliza, I called softly but urgently. It's Marcus Sullivan, Thomas's cousin. Can you hear me? Her eyes found my face, recognition dawning despite her confusion. She nodded weakly. I'm going to get you out of here, I promised. But I need you to stay conscious if you can. The security team was advancing through the laboratory, systematically checking each workstation. We had moments before they reached our position. Sophie had the hidden panel fully open now, revealing a utility passage just wide enough for single-file movement. Come on. I helped Eliza sit up, supporting her weight as her legs proved unsteady from prolonged bed rest. She was weak but mobile. Whatever Mercer's treatment involved, it hadn't left her physically incapacitated. Can you walk? I whispered. I think so, she replied, her voice hoarse from disuse. Mercer watched our preparations with an expression of frustrated calculation. You're making a mistake, Sullivan. Without controlled treatment, the genetic condition will progress rapidly. Eliza has perhaps weeks before neural deterioration becomes irreversible. That's her choice to make, I replied, helping Eliza toward the passage. Not yours. As we reached the opening, Eliza paused, looking back at Mercer. Thomas found out what you were doing, didn't he? The real reason you were funding the research. Mercer met her gaze steadily. Your brother discovered that I had been tracking genetic anomalies for decades, building a database of potentially useful mutations. He understood the implications for privacy and autonomy. So you killed him. I did nothing to your brother except offer him the same treatment I've given you. Mercer replied. He chose differently. The security team had spotted us. Subjects located. Moving to intercept. Sophie disappeared into the passage first, followed by Eliza with my support. As I prepared to follow, Mercer called out one final warning. The building is locked down, Sullivan. Every exit is monitored. You can't escape, and you can't hide forever. I met his gaze. Maybe not, but I can make enough noise on the way down to ensure someone notices. The passage beyond the panel was exactly as Sophie had described, a narrow utility tunnel with pipes and conduits running along the walls. We moved as quickly as Eliza's condition allowed, following Sophie's confident navigation through a maze of service corridors. Where does this lead? I asked as we paused at a junction of several tunnels. City steam system, Sophie replied matter-of-factly. It connects to the subway tunnels about 6 blocks north. My mom works with the Transit Authority on environmental compliance, so I've seen the maps. Behind us, I could hear pursuit, voices echoing through the passage we'd used. Mercer's security team was following, but the narrow confines limited their numbers and mobility. We pressed on through the tunnels, Sophie leading with the confidence of someone who had clearly spent considerable time exploring underground spaces. Eliza's strength seemed to be returning gradually, though she still needed support for balance. Marcus, she said quietly as we navigated a particularly narrow section. What happened to Thomas? I need to know the truth. According to Mercer, he killed himself when he learned about his genetic condition, I replied. But you never believed that. Because it wasn't true, she said firmly. Thomas called me the night he died. He was frightened, yes, but not suicidal. He said he'd discovered something that would change everything about genetic research. Something that made him feel sick. We paused at what appeared to be a maintenance access point, a ladder leading upward toward what Sophie indicated was street level. He said he'd found evidence of unauthorized human trials, Eliza continued. People who had disappeared from various cities, all carrying specific genetic markers. He was planning to contact federal authorities. The pieces were fitting together. Thomas hadn't killed himself out of despair over his diagnosis. He'd been murdered because he'd uncovered Mercer's larger operation, a systematic identification and harvesting of people with useful genetic anomalies. How many others are there? I asked Sophie as she worked on the access panel above. How many people has Mercer brought to the building? I've counted at least 12 different people over the past year, she replied, concentrating on the mechanism. Some stay, some leave through the service door. The same service door I'd been directed to use. The route Mercer used to dispose of failed experiments or uncooperative subjects. Above us, Sophie's work on the access panel paid off. Street-level light filtered down through the opening, along with the distant sounds of early morning traffic. We were close to freedom, but as we prepared to climb toward the surface, the sound of pursuit grew closer. Mercer's security team had navigated the tunnels more quickly than anticipated. Go, I urged Sophie and Eliza. Get to street level and call for help. What about you? Eliza asked. Someone needs to slow them down. As Sophie and Eliza climbed toward street level, I positioned myself to block the tunnel behind us. The narrow confines meant the security team would have to approach single file, negating their numerical advantage. The first figure appeared in the tunnel, a professional security operative in tactical gear. He paused when he saw me blocking the passage. Sir, you need to return with us, he called. Mr. Mercer is concerned for your safety. I'm sure he is, I replied. Tell Mr. Mercer that his experiment is over. Above me, I could hear Sophie's voice calling for help, the sounds carrying the authority of someone who expected to be taken seriously despite her age. Within minutes, there would be police, paramedics, and questions that Mercer would find difficult to answer. The security operative spoke into his radio, then looked back at me. Sir, Mr. Mercer has authorized me to inform you that the building's legal team is prepared to offer significant compensation for your discretion regarding tonight's events. Not interested. He also asked me to remind you about your genetic condition. Without treatment. I'll take my chances with conventional medicine. Above us, the sounds of approaching sirens grew louder. Sophie had successfully contacted emergency services. The security operative spoke urgently into his radio, then began backing away from our position. This isn't over, he warned. Yes, it is, I replied. I climbed toward street level, emerging into the gray dawn of a city morning. Police vehicles were arriving, along with an ambulance for Eliza. Sophie stood with a uniformed officer, gesturing animatedly as she explained the situation. As paramedics began examining Eliza, she caught my arm. "Marcus, there's something else. About the genetic condition." "Later," I said gently. "Let's get you proper medical attention first." But she shook her head insistently. "Thomas found medical records. The genetic condition Mercer described, it doesn't exist. It was fabricated to justify the treatments." The revelation hit like a physical blow. There was no genetic condition, no inherited death sentence. Mercer had created an elaborate fiction to manipulate desperate people into accepting experimental procedures. "He's been lying about everything," Eliza continued. "The treatments, the necessity, the dependency. All of it designed to create a captive population for his research." Around us, the police operation was expanding. More vehicles arrived, along with what appeared to be federal agents. Sophie's call for help had triggered a significant response. As I watched the organized chaos of the rescue operation, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Julian Mercer. I answered, curious about what he might say now that his operation was exposed. "You've made a serious mistake, Sullivan." His voice was calm but carried an undertone of menace. "This research is bigger than one building, one city. You've disrupted one facility, but there are others." "Then I guess we have more work to do," I replied. "The people you think you've saved, they'll be dead within days without proper treatment. Their blood chemistry has been altered, their neurological patterns modified. You can't simply walk away from that level of intervention." I looked at Eliza, who was responding well to the paramedics' ministrations. Her color was improving, her speech becoming clearer. She didn't look like someone facing imminent death. "You're lying," I said into the phone. "Just like you lied about the genetic condition." A pause. Then, "Some lies are more beneficial than others, Detective. You'll learn that when the withdrawal symptoms begin." The line went dead. The investigation that followed consumed the next 6 months of my life. Federal agents, led by Adrian Hughes, who turned out to be an undercover FBI agent rather than an unstable patient, systematically dismantled what they dubbed the Mercer Network. It was larger than I had imagined. 7 cities, 12 facilities, over 200 victims who had been deceived, imprisoned, or worse. The genetic research was real, but its applications were far from the altruistic medical advancement Mercer claimed. Instead, it focused on enhancing human performance for military and intelligence applications. Julian Mercer himself had disappeared during the raid on the Obsidian Tower. His personal elevator led not just to his penthouse but to a private helicopter pad. By the time federal agents reached the roof, he was gone. Eliza recovered fully within weeks, confirming that the dependency Mercer had described was another manipulation. Most of the other victims showed similar resilience once removed from the experimental treatments. Some needed longer-term medical support, but none experienced the catastrophic withdrawal Mercer had threatened. Sophie became something of a celebrity within law enforcement circles, the 10-year-old who had cracked a multi-state human trafficking and illegal experimentation ring through careful observation and remarkable courage. Her mother, Dr. Patricia Hendricks, proved to be not just supportive but instrumental in the investigation, using her transit authority connections to map the full extent of Mercer's underground network. I testified before congressional hearings on genetic research oversight and human experimentation. My law enforcement career, destroyed by my insistence on investigating Thomas's death, was quietly rehabilitated. Several police departments offered positions, acknowledging that my persistence in the Harrington case had been vindicated. But the case wasn't closed. Mercer remained at large, and federal investigators had found evidence of additional research sites in other countries. The hunt continued. 1 year later, I stood in the lobby of what had once been the Obsidian Tower. The building had been sold to a conventional real estate developer who was converting it to standard luxury condominiums. The underground laboratories had been sealed and would eventually be filled with concrete. Eliza joined me, carrying flowers we planned to leave at Thomas's grave. Her health remained excellent, with regular medical monitoring showing no trace of the fictional genetic condition Mercer had used to manipulate her. "Any word on Mercer?" she asked as we prepared to leave. "Interpol thinks they've tracked him to Southeast Asia," I replied. "But he has resources and connections. It could be years before he's found." As we walked toward the exit, I noticed a small figure watching us from across the lobby. Sophie, now 11 and even more observant than before, had convinced her mother to let her visit the building one final time. "Any lingering mysteries?" she asked as she approached us, her serious expression unchanged by the passage of time. "Always," I replied. "But that's what makes the work interesting. She nodded gravely, as if this answer satisfied some deep philosophical question. Mom says we're moving to a different building next month. One without secret laboratories. Probably a wise choice. As we prepared to part ways, Sophie handed me a small wrapped package. I found this in the mechanical room the other day. Thought you might want it. Inside was a photograph, the same image of Eliza and Thomas the First had seen in Mercer's penthouse, but this one bore an inscription on the back. For Marcus, family always comes first. Love, T. Thomas had left it for me, somehow knowing I would eventually find my way to the truth. How did you? I began, but Sophie was already walking away, her small figure disappearing into the crowd of construction workers and real estate agents who now populated the building. Some mysteries, I reflected, were worth preserving. As Eliza and I stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, I felt the weight of the bronze key still in my pocket, kept as evidence, then as a reminder. The case of the Obsidian Tower was closed, but the larger investigation into genetic trafficking and unauthorized human experimentation continued. Somewhere in the world, Julian Mercer was rebuilding his operation, seeking new victims for his research. But now he was hunted, his methods exposed, his network dismantled. And somewhere in the city, a remarkable 11-year-old girl was learning that curiosity and courage could change the world, one carefully observed detail at a time. The work continued. Family, after all, comes first. But justice comes a close second.